Welcome to Psychology of the Daf. We are in Gemara Pesachim, Daf Chav Zayin. The Gemara over here discusses a scenario where a first-generation Amora, Shmuel, amends a brisa deliberately, although usually the halacha is not in accordance with Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. When a majority of Chachamim oppose him, here, in an exceptional case, the halacha was in accordance with him, even against the majority. Now Shmuel then reworded the brisa to falsely indicate that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi's opinion was the rabbi's, as if he was the majority, so that those who learned the brisa subsequently will rule in accordance with this pseudo-majority, which really is Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. It's hard for us to understand such a strategy. To the modern mind, it's scandalous to think of altering a historic record, let alone a holy record, such as a Mishnah or brisa. It feels like a breach of trust or manipulation. The lesson for us is that when trying to understand a mindset that's 2,000 years separate from us, we must keep in mind the limits of our comprehension. There have been so many changes that affect the attitudes toward historical record keeping, we cannot even enumerate them. I'll just give one example. Shmuel's words were recorded 1,500 years before the invention of the printing press. What was the relation of the written word compared to the oral word in the times when writing itself was expensive and scarce? There's no way that they consider the written word as the official record in the same way we do. In fact, the Gemara considers oral testimony far superior to written testimony. For example, see Yavamis Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Beis Mi Piyam V'lo Pi Ksavam is the drasha. The most reliable record was the oral authority of the rabbi or leader of the Talmudic Academy, and who was his successor. In that case, in that society, even written matter is copied over by scribes. It's not perfect. There's no reason to assume that a tradition from master to teacher is less reliable than the written word. In fact, clay or parchment is subject to breaking, being ruined, falsified, copied incorrectly, while oral memory cannot be altered in their minds. To us who rely so much on printed records, we consider oral testimony less reliable, but in ancient times the opposite was probably true. Consider the digital revolution and its changes. Do you remember perhaps an old relative who refused to keep his records on a computer and insisted on doing his bookkeeping by hand? To us this seems absurd, but to him, he couldn't understand how you could trust all this vital data and have it put invisibly on a computer. Only in the last decade are electronic medical records being trusted fully without hard copy backups. This helps you understand what scrolls or clay tablets were considered by the ancients in comparison to oral tradition. Clearly, the written word to them was the unreliable data storage medium, instead of the reverse. While not the subject of today's discussion, understanding this could also shed new light on the relationship between the written and oral Torah, because we don't really understand what writing was like versus orality in ancient times. By keeping these ideas in mind, it helps us cultivate a humble but also realistic way of assessing certain statements in the Gemara that seem to jar with our sensibilities. As we continue in our psychological studies of the Daf, we will see more of the instances like this. Contrary to what some yeshiva folk may wish to believe, Sura and Pumbedisa were not suburbs of Lakewood and Bnei Brak. They lived and thought differently in ways that are difficult to ascertain, and it is upon us to remain humbly curious and open to what we might discover if we stop imposing and projecting our wishes and fears on these great scholars and tzaddikim.